Okay, so after that, I had decided, you know what, fuck it, I'll overcome. I've lost 20 years to shitty family and marijuana and shitty friends and shitty society. Specifically from childhood, like, had my dad gotten a better, upbringing, or no, his father worked really hard. Maybe that's the problem, is my dad had it too easy. Like, a lot of these Russian, girls that I see doing ballerina and stuff, like, their parents love and care about them much more than mine did. That's why I don't believe the propaganda. These kids are living wonderful lives, great lives, because their parents care about them. Not because it's easier or harder, just because their parents care about them, where mine did not at all. They saw me as a burden. My dad used to tell me how he hated the fact that I was born because I ruined his life and it was a financial burden, and if it wasn't for me, he could move to Michigan and get a career and fulfill some kind of dream. My dad got his degree in philosophy, so he couldn't afford to feed and house himself, let alone me. When I had scored gifted in 5th grade and was eligible for grants in a private school, right, being Hispanic in New Mexico in a culture of drugs, poverty, and crime, that was my one chance out of poverty, aside from military, which I didn't do because the marijuana and the hippies that my family tossed me to like garbage got me out of that. But my dad and mom had a meeting after the school informed them that I was eligible for grants in a private school. And they discussed me moving in with my dad because they both knew if they didn't get me out of the house and away from my older gang member brother that my Catholic mother had out of wedlock with a Marine, that I would have no chance at a future. My dad could not take custody of me because he couldn't afford to feed and house himself, let alone me. And just like that, my parents threw my future away. I verified this later on to my mom's face, and she didn't deny it. She was like, it's true. And that was the downstream consequences. The marijuana from 10th grade on 10 years old on, was setting off the schizophrenia, which led to me being homeless and on drugs most of my life until I electrocuted myself. So, I think, about 2019, 2018 even, I had gone to CNM, the community college in New Mexico, the big one in Albuquerque, Central New Mexico College, community college. And with my test scores, I had scored a 300 out of 300. The professor told me that was the first time he'd seen anybody do that in his 40 years working there. Go me. I was automatically eligible for the bridge program. Now, the bridge program means you get your prerequisites at community college and then your degree at a university. Now, in an uncorrupt society, my test scores would have easily, I would already be a doctor. America is that corrupt. Or a psychologist. I could easily be a psychiatrist. Now that I've isolated and identified things like alcohol and marijuana as, bad for me and try to eliminate those best I can. I personally don't choose to do them, but the environment is so saturated with it that secondhand exposure means it's being forced into my blood against my will and without my consent. And no one gives a shit. America is too corrupt to enforce any sort of laws or policies to prevent that. Hence the whole thing about politicians. It's not that politicians will save us from this, it's that politicians created this mess. There is no political solution. You can't vote your way out of this. But I digress. So going to CNM with my high test scores, I went to go to financial aid, and I didn't fill out my selective service system, the draft. I should have. My excuse was the valid one. My mental illness was being activated and exacerbated by schizophrenia, which led to me being homeless. And the financial aid employee who was working at the main campus there, he stank like marijuana. You could smell the marijuana on all the employees. And marijuana junkies have this thing where they don't want to hear anything bad about marijuana. They they become like defensive and aggressive, and how dare you insult the weed? There's nothing wrong with weed, no bad thing. Meh. And so he went out of his way to make sure I didn't get financial aid. I even wrote to Selective Service System, and they said, it's up to the individual institution. Right. So because I said that, right. While I was with my mother, I got scouted by an art university, and they accepted the excuse. And later on, I went to C&M again the last 2 semesters there, last spring and fall of 2021. They accepted this excuse because it is valid. It's the truth. Marijuana set off my schizophrenia. That's why I went fucking homeless and had dreadlocks and was a stinky hippie, and therefore did not fill out my register for the military or the draft. In retrospect, I could have, but that was not my fault. Marijuana forced on me since 10 years old, setting off my schizophrenia. That the power of choice is not present in a cognitively compromised mind. Therefore, accountability cannot be attributed to a cognitively compromised mind, compromised by, corrupting factors in the environment. So, C&M accepted me this time. I got dropped out of 5 out of 7 classes in 2 semesters. The 2 that I did complete, I finished with a 3.9 GPA. I've read so much psychology and neuroscience that I passed the last 3 modules. They assign you reading for the week, and then you take a test to make sure you've learned what you're supposed to read. I passed the last 3 modules with with actually really good grades, without reading any of the material. And I passed the exam without reading any of the material. The book it was so biased politically. There was corruption within the book, right? Like, very liberal, propaganda. It was disgusting. Like, honestly, it was such an indoctrinating, politically biased thing. It was fucking disgusting. The reason I got dropped from the other classes is the marijuana in my environment, the involuntary exposure to secondhand marijuana set me in a schizophrenic episode, and I ended up cussing out my professors on Zoom or in email. So I'll do another video.